Welcome to Tiger Chainsaw Interviews. These exclusive interviews will give you a behind-the-scenes retrospective mixed in with some amazing secrets of your favorite games and franchises by the developers and creators of them. Now, if I have filmed the interview, you'll be able to watch it. Otherwise, it's a phone interview, so just sit back and relax. Now, I have done some incredible exclusive interviews with some amazing gaming legends in this community. So hit that sub button to make sure you don't miss any of those interviews. Alright, let's get to our interview of the day. I have a very special interview today and a returning guest. In my first interview with John Sauer, we discussed his position at Tonka as he was the North American project manager for the Sega Master System. In the first part of today's interview, we'll be discussing what happened to John after he left Tonka, which includes becoming a founding editor of GamePro before becoming an editor at Sega Visions, along with some insight on some popular Sega Genesis games. In the second part of the interview, we'll be diving deep into one of the most popular games on the Master System, Phantasy Star. John translated the entire game for Sega Japan and is a big reason the game was so successful in the United States. He shares his memories and love for the game in the second half of this interview. John, thank you again for joining us today. So, what was the concept behind Sega Visions? When did you first hear about an actual magazine forming? And how did you join the team? Because if I read this correctly, you were on sabbatical in the Florida Keys. Is that correct?
No, not quite sabbatical.
Okay.
The basis for Sega Visions actually started with the Sega Challenge newsletter, which was the marketing piece that Sega had put together, pretty much under the guidance of Steve Hanawa, to start marketing the Sega Master System, against the Nintendo Entertainment System. So that type of document, which I worked on, and you can see all my cheesy pictures are there from way back when. When Sega and Tonka parted ways, Sega recognized that they needed to have some type of a marketing endeavor, and they ran it through some freelance guys for a while. And then as the Genesis took off and Sega US formed into a more solid, cohesive organization, they brought it under a guy named Nick Lavroff. And they wanted the magazine to be more professional. Pardon me. More professional than an in-house magazine could be, so they contracted with Infotainment World. And Infotainment World was the publisher of GamePro magazine. And also they had a division that was doing hint books. GamePro was a magazine that I was one of the founding editors for, and it was at the time the crown jewel in video game publications. They did everything right to help people understand what video games were hot, what games were not. It was just a solid publication with great people behind it. And they picked up the contract for Sega Visions. So I was down in the Florida Keys consulting for game companies, writing a novel. I had my captain's license, and I was a big game fisherman. I took people fishing for tarpon and sailfish and mahi-mahi and tuna. And I got a call from a guy named John Rousseau. And John Rousseau was the publisher for Sega Visions magazine, and he was spearheading the Sega Visions project. He had seen the work that I had done for the Sega Challenge newsletter and then an interim publication, and wanted to know if I was interested to go to work for Sega Visions. He actually flew out to Miami. We sat down and had lunch, and I liked John right away. He offered me a whole lot more than I was making as a charter captain. And it was just exciting to get back to the game market.
Yeah.
I miss working on video games. So I said, what the heck? I took the job and moved out to San Francisco.
Big game fishing. I was not expecting. That's quite the pivot in, kind of a career. The only big game fishing I've done was in Alaska. I went halibut fishing. but I can appreciate a good catch. So I'm sure you had some fun down there.
It was awesome. It's I'll send you some pictures that you can flip into your publication of the young me with a ponytail. In the best shape I've ever been in my life.
I would love that.
As just a young guy. Yeah, it was so much fun. It's actually, looking back at it now from being 61 years old, I was in my 20s. I had the opportunity to move to the Florida Keys, get paid to work on video games, and get paid to go fishing. It really was just a magical time in my life that I'm very grateful for.
You've lived a pretty good life, from video games and fishing. I think you got it made there, John. But
tell me about it. It's on those rare occasions where I feel down in the dumps about something, all I got to do is count my blessings. And really, life has been good to me. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. What were your first impressions of the Genesis? How did it compare to the Master System in which you helped launch? And when did you first get your hands on the Genesis?
I got my hands on the Genesis probably 8 months before it launched. This was back when Tonka and Sega were heading towards their breakup. But they still had sent the Genesis over to Tonka to take a look at. So I got my hands on one of the first versions, and I played Altered Beast when it was still in development stage, and I was blown away by the graphic potential of the Genesis. It looked cool. It controlled better. It was really so far ahead of the Master System in potential. We were all very excited about it. I was looking forward to working on it. But then, the breakup happened, and that was it.
So you were the editorial director of Sega Visions. What came with that role, and what did you like about the job, and was there anything that you didn't care for?
No, I liked everything about it. With any job where you have a company working as a client company, for a larger company, in addition to the direction that we would have on writing reviews about games, we had to deal with different personalities of different people, both on the Sega side, internally at GamePro, and then at the third-party developer side. And I was a young guy, and it was great schooling for me on how to work diplomatically with people when you think you know everything.
Okay, all right. So
I was a little headstrong in my younger days, so there was some good lessons. And really, I gotta. If John Russo ever hears this, I want John to know how great of a boss he was. He did some things with me, like he put me in a Dale Carnegie course, which sounds kind of cheesy, but the stuff that I learned in that course about how to work with people have been guiding principles for me ever since then. So he really set me up to be successful in the position, and I was. It was great. Some of the things that we did that your listeners will find exciting. Take a game like Echo the Dolphin. Now think how big the world is for Echo. I know it personally because we had a special Genesis where I could use a foot pedal and stop the game. I mapped out every level of that game.
Wow.
One screen at a time and stitched it together in Photoshop.
Wow.
We did that for Echo. We did that for Sonic. We did that for what was that marketing game? I can't remember the name of it. It had the little 7-Up guy.
Oh, Cool Spot.
Yeah, Cool Spot. So we did that for Cool Spot, which was tough because the screens would never line up correctly. So we had to do so much like Photoshop snipping and stretching and cutting to make those maps. Map making was fun, but it was tedious. There was like all-night gaming sessions to get those things done.
That sounds pretty fun to me. It's fun to hear of the magic of the early 90s and how you guys were putting this together in magazines. And honestly, that's something that I really miss. I miss video game magazines. There's just something about getting that copy, once a month, having it in your hand and flipping through and seeing what games are coming out. That's something that I do miss. So going back to Sega Visions, it was obviously meant to help market games for the consoles, which meant good and great reviews help sell games. Was there any...
the first year, yes.
Okay.
But some of the games that came out were they were so stinky that I could use different words, but I won't on your show. I mean, they were so bad that we would have discussions. With Kurt Busch was the director on the Sega side, and we would sit down with Kurt and we would just talk about these games. And Kurt would have to go back to his team and say, you know what, guys, we can't just give this a glowing star review because the game is horrible. And part of the contract with Sega would include getting some press for the game in Sega Visions. So if you look at some of the later visions of Sega Visions, some of the games would have like point-counterpoint style criticism of the games, for just not being all the way there. We could never come out and say, all right, this game is horrible. But Sega did make an attempt to practice some fair journalism, because people would always come back and make the point that you did, that, hey, this is just a marketing thing. You're not telling us the truth. You're just trying to sell games. So it was kind of a mix of both.
Yeah, that's good to hear that you're honest with your game reviews. If there was a couple bad games, which ones were they? Which ones were you just like, man, this game sucks?
That's we never covered it, but it was an Altered Beast. I hated that game.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about it in just a few minutes. That'll be good. I hope you keep that same energy.
I'm gonna rip that one. I'm gonna rip that beast a new beast orifice. Stay tuned. But I reviewed so many games on the Genesis over the years. Really, nothing stands out as a horrible game. Some of the Batman games weren't that great. And then there were games like Mortal Kombat, which was just phenomenal. And people could play that forever. There were the Phantasy Star games, which I don't think were as good as the first game on the Master System, but they were still fun. Although I had some nostalgia and some skin in the game, you could say, with the Phantasy Star games. Not just from developing the first one, but for doing some of the hint books. So it was just that in terms of a platform, it was such a good long ride for Sega, and it established them as a company that made great games in the arcade and made great games on the home system. And they were doing so well until the Saturn.
Yeah,
and the Saturn was the unhinging of Sega.
That's a great segue into my next question. I read that your name is still associated with Sega Visions, which I believe ended in 1995. Was it discontinued because of the poor sales of the Saturn? And I guess following up on that, what was it like covering 3 different main consoles from Sega during your career?
Oh, it was epic. It's I felt that I had played a part in the rise of one of the greatest console companies in the world. I got to play on 2 out of the 3 systems. I really didn't play on Saturn. I was there when Sega took it, ran off into the sunset, and then hit the speed bump and got a flat nose on the concrete. But it was just so cool, especially now looking back at so much history that I helped create inadvertently. Not knowing that I was creating history. It's like a guy who learns how to make a surfboard, becomes a great surfer, and just loves surfing, then looks back and realizes, oh wow, I did something. That's how it feels. Like in the glow of time, it still shines pretty bright in my mind.
That's pretty great to hear. With the magazine discontinuing, was it because of the Saturn's poor sales? Was that the direction that it was going?
No, it was discontinued because Sega was paying Infotainment World, a decent piece of change, and I can't remember how much. But it was a premium price to make a good premium magazine. And Sega did not want to keep paying for the magazine. And they told Infotainment World, well, what we want you to do is go out and sell advertising. And the advertising can fund the production of the magazine, just like GamePro. They wanted it to be a freestanding publication like GamePro. Yet they wanted to maintain the editorial control of the publication. So those things just didn't work for Infotainment World. They weren't willing to go out and sell advertising for a publication that was a marketing publication for Sega, where Sega could dictate the content and the quality of the content. So it just kind of like fell apart there, and Sega decided I think they were going to try and do it internally, but I think they never found anybody to pick up the concept and do what they wanted to do.
Okay.
And then what Sega did to launch the Saturn, launching it with just a select number of retailers and cutting everybody else out. That was a step that earned them a lot of enmity in the retail chain, and they never really got over that.
Did you know
there was the problems with the Saturn? Like the difficulty of developing games for it. That just it was kind of like a baseball game where everybody starts making errors at the same time.
Did you know that the Saturn was going to be launched like that internally? Was there any discussion about it, or was it kind of a surprise for everyone?
No, it was there were discussions internally at Sega, which I got to hear some of over the approach, and not everybody wanted to launch it that way, but there were some relationships they felt that they would benefit from by doing it.
Okay.
So they didn't gain consensus inside of the company. The people that were in charge just went ahead and did it.
Okay. So before we get into my specific game questions, I was just going to tell you, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a magazine that's actually physical, and it was launched, I think, a couple years ago, but it's the spiritual successor of Sega Visions. It's called Sega Mega Visions, and they cover, old Sega games and kind of some new releases from Sega. But I just thought that was pretty cool. I was kind of researching Sega Visions, and I found out there's actually a magazine called Sega Mega Visions that's currently in publication. So I don't know if you were aware of that or not.
I was not. Do you know who's behind it? Do you know offhand?
I don't. I think they're located in New Jersey, the headquarters. The reason I know about it is one of my friends that I've met on YouTube, he's actually an editor for Sega Mega Visions, and so I've been to his house, and he's got all the publications there. So I just thought it was pretty cool, and I just thought maybe you might like knowing that someone picked up Sega Visions, and it obviously meant a lot to them to revive it. So just kind of a cool little tidbit for you. But
Mega Visions. Oh, I'll look it up. That's pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, John. So you kind of teased us a little bit with your thoughts with Altered Beast. This is your platform to let us know your unfiltered thoughts, and what do you think of Altered Beast? Why don't you like it?
Okay, I gotta slap Altered Beast like the bad dog it is. It was going to be the Impact game, and it was the Impact game because there was some arcade play off of it. Although the way the arcade game was and the way that the console game was, the console game just fell flat. And the gameplay was, compared to other games on the Master System, where the graphics maybe weren't so great, but the gameplay was just stellar. And the gameplay was just kind of weak. There wasn't anything new or unique or revolutionary. To compare it to Sonic, Sonic was, from a gameplay standpoint, Sonic was just incredible. It made use of the entire game, whereas Altered Beast was still just basically a side scroller. And then you go ahead and you get your power ups, and then you fight the big boss, and then he takes all your stuff away. And it's like, okay, let's do it again. And that was the game. So, I remember that we did not like it internally, but this was when what Tonka felt about games for the Genesis were becoming less relevant to Sega.
So, I think you might have answered it, that it was really good in the arcades, and it wanted to be a pack-in game for the Genesis. Why do you think Sega was pushing this game to be the pack-in game for the Genesis? Why did this one stand out as opposed to the others?
I think because there was a gap in third-party development. Ideally you wanted to launch a console with about 15 games in the market, and they weren't there, and so they wanted a big draw title to be in the box. And I thought that it was just that was one of their hot arcade games. That would be the one.
I think Altered Beast, my issue with it is that it's a very easy game once you get, the hang of it, and it's only 20 minutes long. So I think that's where my problem is with it. But one thing I really do like about it is I like the voice, the sound effects in it. I thought that was kind of a fun little thing back then.
Rise from your tomb, or whatever it was.
Very good. So, do you have any specific memories or cool insight or thoughts on Altered Beast? I know you just kind of said why you didn't like it. Talk to me about this demo that you were playing. At first, you must have thought it was pretty cool, right?
Yeah, initially, graphically compared to, what had been available, even at the best on the Master System, Altered Beast looked so much better. There was more definition. There was more pixels. There was voice. There was lots of neat things to be excited about. But that excitement kind of wore off. Basically, the lipstick fell off the pig pretty quickly, just because the gameplay just wasn't there. Contrast that to one of the other titles you asked me about, Gunstar Heroes. Gunstar Heroes for me was the first game I played on the Genesis that really showed me the potential for the system.
Let's talk about it. Gunstar Heroes, the speed and the pace is really what sticks out to me, and how much action is on the screen. What was the reception at Sega Visions when this was released and when you were playing it? Kind of let us know your thoughts on it.
Sure. It was this is one of the titles that I over across the years that has stuck with me because I enjoyed it so much. Graphically, it's okay. The storyline it's kind of your standard, ported Japanese storyline. Your dad has stolen your whatever. You have to go rescue your brother from your dad, or your sister from your dad, or whatever the storyline was. But it was the gameplay, the different selections of firearms that you had, that you could use not only left and right and up, but diagonally. And it was the diagonal aspect that was exciting. I always played this game in one-player mode. I never played two-player mode. And I would gain the power-ups until I got the shot patterns that I want. I think it was the electro shot. It was one where you could shoot an enemy and then lock it on and keep the buttons pressed and then dodge around the screen, dodging enemy fire until you just basically fried them to death. And I just thought that was the concept of being able to do something like that, where you didn't have to score a direct hit. You could actually do a lock on and then move around. There was more stuff going on at the same time. And I found that to be very, very exciting and, indicative of the cool things that could come on the Genesis.
John, I need you to be brutally honest with me. I'm not very good at Gunstar Heroes, and I think I'm pretty good at video games. Do I just suck at Gunstar Heroes, or is it kind of difficult?
It's difficult. But I guarantee you, that you versus me now, you would just mop the floor with me. I don't have the same fast twitch that I had, back when I did this for a living. But it was a difficult game, but that was part of the challenge. It was part of the excitement.
The complete opposite of Altered Beast, which is almost no challenge. But
yeah.
All right. Do you remember Steel Empire, the other game?
I remember playing it briefly and hating it.
Perfect.
It did nothing for me. It was basically like an Opal blimp.
The only reason that it sticks out to me, aside from the kind of steampunk aesthetics to it, is that it was one of the first shooters that I played that you could shoot forward or backward. Most shooters that I was used to, you just shot forward. There was no gun to shoot backwards. You don't really remember it, do you?
I don't, honestly. It's not one that stuck with me. I didn't spend enough time with it to develop either an affinity or a hatred.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I know you've played thousands of games, so I'm sure a couple of them slipped through the cracks by now.
More and more each year sometimes.
We have now reached the halfway mark of this interview, and we'll begin to discuss a game that is very near and dear to John's heart, Phantasy Star. John, are you ready to dive into your memories of Phantasy Star?
Phantasy Star is so iconic in the history of role-play games that it's definitely worth the focus of itself.
That's great to hear it. So I guess my first question to you would be, before Phantasy Star, had you experienced any JRPGs before, and if so, what were they?
I had not. My sole experience with RPGs was the Lord British series of games on an Apple IIc.
Not familiar with those.
Look up Lord British sometime.
Okay.
He was a developer, I believe he was from Wisconsin, and he took, in fact, I should do that while I'm talking to you. He took board games and started to turn them into computer RPGs. And they were a combination of text and simple graphics. And if you've ever played with an Apple IIc, you know how limiting that green screen was.
Yeah.
So the games were, by today's standard, and I'm talking slowly because I'm trying to type with one finger because I talk, but they were so much fun. The storylines were great. I would get off work at Tonka Toys, and I'd go home and eat dinner and crack a cold one, and play all night.
Those are the days.
Lord Cantabrian British is the ruler of Britannia, a kingdom in the fictional world of Sosaria, created by Richard Garriott. So Richard Garriott was the developer of the games.
Okay.
And that was my introduction to RPGs, and I loved them.
Okay. So what did you know about Phantasy Star before playing it? Had anyone from Sega Japan talk to you about it? Or I believe you said Steve played it maybe before you. Did he say anything to you about it?
Yeah, I think Steve had played it. Steve touched a lot of the games before me. The way that it would work is that Steve would get the games, and he had sent me an EEPROM reader. So he would basically modem the code over, and I would put them onto EEPROMs and put them on the board so I could play the games. And I can't remember if Steve queued the game up for me or not, aside from just the very, very basic that it was it was a popular role-playing game in Japan. And what I got was a very early version of the game in Japanese, and in the mail, a very, very thick script for the game in Japanese.
So I guess, what did that mean? So the script in Japanese, what exactly was that? Was that like a guide, or was it like an introduction to the game?
It was the entire text in the game, the entire script of the game.
And it was in Japanese.
I'm not sure how a Weasley wimp, what willst thou do, looks in kanji, but it was the entire, inches thick text for the game.
Wow.
So in my role as the product guy for Sega for Tonka, I had to do two things. One, I had to start learning the game enough so I could make some suggestions on changes for gameplay. Two, I had to find a translator who could take this big, thick thing and turn it into English, so I could go back to Sega of Japan so they could rewrite the game in English.
You had a pretty important role there.
You know what? It was so much more important than looking back over time. That so many of the games that I worked on that were iconic now, where we made changes to names of jets or stuff like that, just because it didn't look right to the U.S. It's interesting how little things, if you look up online some of the games that I worked on and said, well, why did you name this jet that when it didn't exist? It's because the marketing people thought it would look cool. So I think there are some differences in Phantasy Star US from a literal translation of the Japanese game, but I think the differences are pretty minor.
So take us back to that moment when you first booted up Phantasy Star. What were your initial thoughts on the game? And really feel free to just share your experience with it when you played it for the first time. Did it blow you away immediately, or did it take you some time
completely.
to get into?
No, the true concept of first person really hadn't developed yet. So you started with the game. You had the person. You had the scripted scenes that introduce you to who you are and why you're in the world. And then all of a sudden you're out walking around, kind of in that little third person view. And I thought that was cool. I just like cruise around, check stuff out. It reminded me of some of the some of the Mario games and some of the other stuff that I played. And then I went into a dungeon and I saw my first creature, and the creature was like 3D, and I thought that was just amazing.
So that was kind of my next question. Is one of the things that blows me away with it being a Sega Master System game is the first person dungeon crawling and the traveling to 3 different planets via spaceship. What was it like to experience those things before pretty much anyone else? Was that your wow moment of this game?
It was one of the wow moments. The entire game was a wow moment because I had never played anything like it. And at the time, playing games was my job. So I didn't think like, oh my gosh, I am so fortunate to play this before anybody else in the world, because that was kind of my everyday. But the game was so radically different from side scrollers or vertical scrollers. The concept was deep and wide. I'd already been schooled on on space travel from some of the Ultimate games, the reverse games. But to see it in a video game, on my screen, was just amazing. I was in love with the game.
How long did it take for you to beat the game, your first run? Did it take a couple days or a week, or do you remember how long?
I never had a one first run on the game. I poked around with it in Japanese just to see if I could make it do stuff. But then when we got the text back, which was translated, so it was very rough. So I had to go through, and this took weeks, going through the entire script and rewriting the script into legible English. Once the script was done, we had to send the script back to Sega Japan, and Sega Japan recoded the game. Or they made a version in English. And then when they started to send that back in bits and pieces, then I started to play the game. So by the time I actually could play the game from start to finish, I don't know how long it took me, but I had played so many parts of the game so many times already that really it was playing the last mile of the game to win.
It's just so fascinating, your job that you had as far as translating and making suggestions to Sega Japan. It's just so cool that you got to do that type of stuff. Did you think it was going to be a big hit?
Oh, absolutely. It was such a cool game. I mean, there was nothing else like it that I'd ever played before. I knew it was going to be a huge hit.
I guess, what was the internal talk at Tonka and Sega about Phantasy Star? Did they kind of agree with you with, this is going to be a big hit, we should push this in marketing? To be honest, I wasn't around back then, so I don't know what the hype was coming out, but was there a lot of hype around it when it was getting released?
Well, let me tell you, young man. When Phantasy Star came out, I was so gaga over the game that the marketing people tended to listen to me, so they pushed it and they made a big deal about it. And I remember the game sold well, and what I just didn't understand, mainly because RPG games on consoles was a relatively new thing, was just how world-connected Phantasy Star was. It wasn't until later in life, when I had gone away from gaming for a while and come back under the guise of Sega Visions magazine, that I really saw just how far spread worldwide the cult or the fandom of Phantasy Star had been. That's so very cool then. I think I was old enough that I could appreciate it, that I had, in my wild and crazy youth, that I had played a part in establishing something so broad spread and famous and well received.
Absolutely. You definitely got to take some pride in that. Phantasy Star today, I wish they would come out with some new releases. I was going to ask you, do you think Phantasy Star as a series gets the love it deserves? I know you don't typically play video games now, but if a Phantasy Star came out, would you maybe play it?
You know, if I had the system to play it on, yes, I would. If nothing else, just for the nostalgia value of tying back into something that I helped start so long ago.
Do you think the series gets the love that it deserves? You know, there's people always talk about, you know, Final Fantasy or Dragon Warrior. Do you think Phantasy Star gets its nod?
Well, I think it does, but in a different way. You know, Final Fantasy and games like that, they had their manufacturers pumped, you know, gazoodles of dollars to turn them into other properties, into line extensions that turn into toys and stuff like that. And I don't think, you know, Sega as a company really moved away from this category of product. And the games themselves have always done well with, I think, with more game purists. And I think that the love of Phantasy Star has waxed and waned over the decades. And it's weird to say, you know, that the love of a video game can actually wax and wane over decades, but it certainly has. If Sega decided to come out with a new Phantasy Star game, or even a reboot of the first game, I think it would do phenomenally well, especially if they marketed it correctly.
You gotta still have some. You gotta have some connections over there. You gotta make this happen, because I would love a remake of the first one.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't. I mean, this is a great topic for a GoFundMe. If anybody out there is a coder and is new and wants to pick up the torch, I will support you. But you know, I'm past my place in life where this would be a good fit for me. But it would certainly be wonderful to see it done.
So, do you have a favorite character or moment or dialogue in the original Phantasy Star, and if so, what is it? I'll go first and kind of share one of my favorite moments, and it's there's this random woman, I believe, that you're speaking to, and she just goes, "Do you like Sega? Yes, no." And I just love it how you're out there, like, you know, trying to save the universe from this evil entity, and this woman just wants to know if you like Sega. Mm-hmm. So do you have anything like that you like?
Well, I thought that Alice was cool just because she was the main character, and she was a girl, but she still was just she was an ass kicker. I thought that was great. My two favorite characters were Odin and Mayu.
Yeah, that's
Odin just because he was pretty beastly, and Mayu because I look back at Mayu and I see Pikachu in a lot of ways.
I see that too.
Yep.
Now, what was the wizard's name? Wasn't he kind of a dick? You get him later on in the game, and he's kind of like cocky and
Lastic or Lastic.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, just all those characters. Now you got it in my head that there should be a remake of it, but man, that'd be great to see that. Okay, so
but either pure first person, or maybe even like a RuneCraft-esque live world would be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so what is a memory that you will never forget playing Phantasy Star? One that perfectly captures your experience.
Okay. This is not the answer that you will expect. But when I was take in mind, I was in my very young 20s. And this was back when trade shows, like consumer electronics shows, were very big deals, and you had big booths, and you hired lots of attractive girls to tell people about the games. So they would put me in the booth to basically teach all these very attractive young women how to play video games. And they used a modeling agency out of Atlanta, Georgia. And so I would hang out with these girls during the whole show and get to know them pretty well. And so we would just sit there in the booth and play the games, and watching these girls who could care less about video games with the reactions to some of the dialogue. I remember one lady in particular who was she was just a wonderful person, and she would like do dungeon battles, And she would go, "Away went, what wilt thou do?" So whenever I've seen that, "What wilt thou do?" It's like I always hear that Southern accent. What wilt thou do?
Oh man, that is a memory that should be shared with everyone. Yeah. Oh man.
But then the other thing that ties to that, at the same show, so I'd go out and hang out with all these girls, and everybody would be like, "Dude, what have you done to pull all those beautiful chicks?" Well, we got free tickets to go to a Lou Rawls show. Lou Rawls wanted to hang out with all the girls afterwards, but he wasn't going to let me tag along because he just wanted all the chicks for himself. So all the girls said, "No, we're going to stay with John. Bye, Lou." And I was like, "Nope. Who's the king? Who's the king?"
It pays to be you sometimes, John. It sure does.
You know what? It does, and that was one of those moments that again I look back and I was like, I was just a very, very lucky, happy young guy.
Yeah, I was checking out the photos you sent me. You looked like a fun time back in the day.
It certainly was. It's the things that 40 years now, looking back on that time of my life, the things that I got to do, the games that I got to pioneer into the U.S. That just have made so many people happy over the years. Truly, I was fortunate to be where I was.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. So that's pretty much most of my questions I have for you about Phantasy Star. Do you have anything that you want to add or anything that you want to share that you'd be like, this would be a really cool bit of information about the game? Anything that comes to your mind?
Just that for what it was at the time, it really was groundbreaking because it gave people a new way to look at a game that just hadn't been done before. A lot of people piled on that and came up with similar concepts in games. It kind of put the end to the Ultima Lord British type of just flat down, vertical move around in the world, tinny sound game. It's the first time that a console game came out that was so much better than a computer game.
Yeah, I can see that.
It set the bar.
Yeah, just talking about it makes me want to fire it up again. I secured my physical copy of it earlier this year, and for a pretty decent price. But man, I'm just so excited to have it on my shelf, and what a time! It's such a great experience, and it was really cool to kind of hear your history with it, and hear about the babe booths. I love that. Or the booth babes. So that was my interview with John Sauer, who I would consider a friend after all this time we've spent discussing his career. In fact, he even ended up sending me a copy of his book that he wrote, and I'm currently enjoying reading it. John's passion and hard work helped Sega in the 80s and the 90s, and I'm thankful for his memories. Thank you, John, for sharing them. If you love exclusive interviews with game creators and game developers, make sure you hit that sub button to watch and listen to plenty of more interviews that I have coming up. Thanks for listening.